Welcome to the Interlocutor Podcast. I'm Tyrel Cameron Eskelson. My guest today is John Groot. John grew up in eastern Canada. He eventually found his way to Taiwan, where he got married and has worked as a writer and teacher for soon to be 24 years. Much of his writing can be found at the Culture Shack blog. In 2020, John published a travel memoir called Taiwanese Feet, which is about his goal of walking the entire coast of the island. John joins me today to talk about his life in Taiwan, becoming an author, and the new projects that he's been working on. John, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Tyler.
I'd like to begin by asking you about your background in Canada. Where did you grow up there, and what was life like growing up in Canada?
Well, life for me was pretty good. I grew up, my earliest memories were of Nova Scotia in the Halifax, Dartmouth area. And I remember it was a pretty happy family. You know, we had our arguments and stuff, but overall it was a happy family life. And there was a lot of outdoor activity. You know, my dad was an outdoorsman and he would take us on hikes and to the beach and to the park. And it was I guess, a very normal, healthy, active childhood, you could say.
You spent a couple of years in a place called Lesotho in southern Africa. What were the circumstances that took your family to that country, and what was your time there like?
So yeah, Lesotho, that is correct. And it's, most people have never heard of it, but if they look at the map of South Africa, they'll see a little kind of rectangular shaped country at an angle, which is an enclave within South Africa, and it's mainly a mountainous country. My father loved to travel, but he was also always a very responsible guy. He always wanted to take care of his family. So when he had a chance to get a job working for the Canadian government in Southern Africa, he took it. So he got the expat package in Lesotho, and also some of my father's relatives. My father was from England, had his parents and his sister had emigrated to South Africa. So this was a chance also for my dad's kids to interact with their kids and for him to have the two families close to each other. Lesotho was very interesting, and it's a very poor country. And I know it's not a popular word to use these days to say primitive, but I think emotionally that would be a word that described how it felt. You know, you see very simple dwellings and people living in very humble circumstances. And the houses, most places didn't have a TV. Our phone number had 4 digits. I still remember my original phone number from back then. But as a kid, you just kind of go with it. I mean, it's just like everything kind of, wow, this is so different. And then a month later, you're just into your new life. But it was fascinating. It was the first kind of intense exposure to something completely different than middle class Canadian life.
Mm-hmm. You eventually made your way to Taiwan. I'm curious to know when you first heard about Taiwan and thought about it as a potential destination to visit.
First time I heard about Taiwan actually was when I was in Lesotho, which was strange. We lived in the capital, Maseru, and at that time, Lesotho, I guess they were flirting with diplomatic recognition of the Republic of China, Taiwan. So there was an embassy, a Taiwanese embassy. They didn't focus on the word Taiwan. It was the Republic of China, which at that time was the real China. That was the way it was presented. So there was an embassy, and they also had a Chinese restaurant. And so we didn't have a lot of restaurants there, so we went out there several times. But then that kind of faded from my consciousness. And then, of course, I heard about Taiwan pretty much around the same time everybody did, during their economic miracle, where they became a big center of contract export manufacturing. But I just thought of it as just some country in Asia. I had no positive or negative association with it. It's just, oh, it's a country in Asia. Lots of manufacturing. Make computers, IBM clones, things like that. But then a friend of mine who is still living in Asia, she's now living in Singapore, moved there to teach English for a few years, and she came back and she told me stories about Taiwan. And when I myself got the sort of travel lust, wanderlust, she put it on the map for me. So I eventually ended up moving here.
It's interesting that, as you say that, I think most of the expats living in Taiwan that I know of and have a friendship or acquaintance with, when I ask them that question, it's just occurring to me now that the first thing they say is, somebody told me about it, and either I went there with them or I went there because of them. So I guess word of mouth was a way of coming to Taiwan back at that time.
I think so. I think, of course, as we all remember, in the 80s, it was going to teach English in Japan. And of course, other people went to Japan for other reasons. They were fascinated by the culture. They were interested in the business opportunities. But there were certainly tens of thousands of ESL teachers who went to Japan. And that became a big thing. And I think over time, a lot of those people visited China, Korea, and Taiwan, and then that knowledge could get passed on to other people. As you say, pre-World Wide Web, for the beginning part of that process anyway, so word of mouth would have been the major way. And then eventually a few travel books, I guess.
Could you share with me some of your first experiences of visiting Taiwan? Where did you live and what were you doing when you first arrived there?
Well, I came in, I didn't have much of a plan. One of Sarah's friends said that I could crash at their place for a few weeks. I took a taxi from the airport. I had maybe, it wasn't much. It was about $1,000 and a visitor visa. It was very, backpacker kind of plan. I remember taking the taxi from, at that time, CKS Airport. Now it's called Taoyuan Airport, along the highway. And I got my first experience of crazy Taiwanese drivers, because the taxi driver, I think he was a frustrated Formula One driver. So I was just driving through the traffic, and I remember thinking, this guy's crazy, but he's actually has pretty good control of the vehicle. But it was a little bit crazy. And then I remember seeing all the signs in Chinese, which is kind of weird. And then I ended up staying at a friend of my friend Sarah's house. And it was right in the area Dadaochen near Dihua Street, and one of the oldest and most traditional parts of Taiwan. Certainly the oldest and most traditional part, or one of the oldest and most traditional parts of Taipei. And that was fascinating. So, the second day I was out there was walking on Dihua Street and walking and seeing these old temples. So my first day, after waking up from my trip and, getting to where I was staying, the first full day in Taiwan was in that area. So I got a good hit of the traditional culture and the history.
How long did you live there before you had an idea that you might stay here for long term?
That took years before I realized that I would stay here, that I would plan to stay here for quite a few years. At the time I was, this was, 23 years ago. I was that much younger. I wasn't exactly young at the time I came here. I was around, I guess I was 37. But now I'm 60, so I was quite a bit younger than that. And I didn't have a time limit in mind. I had an idea in my head, I'll probably stay here for about 4 or 5 years. But there was no timetable. So I was just enjoying the moment and just having a great time. Mostly having a great time. But I guess it's when I decided that I was going to stay with my, at that time, girlfriend, now my wife, that then the timeline just sort of went from unknown to indefinite. But of course, that was facilitated by the fact that I was enjoying being in Taiwan. But I decided that wasn't so bad. Like I basically decided to stay with my wife. But I'd already made the decision, emotionally or mentally, that this was a great place to live, even for a long time.
Over the course of your 20 plus years in Taiwan, what are some of the changes that stand out to you that you've witnessed over the years?
Well, I guess like anywhere else in the world, Taiwan has become more internet crazy. So that's just that's a change that's happened also in Canada and other places. I've really noticed the growth in the infrastructure, the constant building of highways and trains and subway networks. For example, when I came to Taipei in 2001, I believe there were only two major subway lines. And there were a few very small branch lines that just went one station, but there were two major lines, and now there's about 7 lines. So if you look at the map, the original map was like this, and now it's not as bad as the Tokyo subway map, but it's a very complex diagram. In terms of the people themselves, I guess another thing is, especially in northern Taiwan, but also in southern Taiwan, it's become less anarchic, less chaotic, more law-abiding. Taiwan had its period of, after democratization in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a wave of kind of anarchistic behavior that was going on. The gangsters sort of came out and got involved in business. So it was a little bit crazy, but I just got a little bit of that when I first arrived here. But now especially in Taipei, it's a much more orderly and law-abiding society, I would say, which makes it a little bit more boring too.
You mentioned the subway or the metro in Taipei, and I remember from my experience there that it's an amazing system. The Taipei Basin is huge, but you get down into that metro system, and it's so efficient to get it across the city.
Very efficient, and people, generally speaking, are fairly patient and well-behaved. I mean, if you do the wrong thing, if you bump into somebody on the MRT, they call it, or the subway, they might roll their eyes at you. It's not like England or New York, or hey buddy, what are you doing? That's very, very unlikely. And even if you actually bump into somebody quite hard, and I feel bad about that, if you just say sorry, they're just like, no problem. So everyone gets along pretty well. It's very clean too. You rarely see people eating or drinking. It's clean. If there's a mess, cleaners show up. And except for the occasional psycho, it's pretty safe. But there's been a couple of knife attacks and such, but they're about like once every few years, and the local population has learned about that. So the last time that happened, they would already, they were conscious of this threat. The person was restrained immediately by a group of onlookers.
Several years into living in Taiwan, could you take me back to the decision or the moment of inspiration where you had this idea that it might be possible, or it is possible, to walk along the entire coastline of the island?
That's right. So I think the process was kind of an unconscious process at first. I was starting to get a little bit bored, not super bored, but a little bit bored, because after being here for several years, I'd kind of seen most of the really cool stuff in the Taipei area for weekend trips and such. And I was still having a good time, but it was just there wasn't so much that was new. That my adventure of moving to Taiwan was starting to feel a little bit like a routine, a pleasant routine, but still a routine. And then it just suddenly came to me one day, well, maybe I should do some kind of travel-based adventure in Taiwan. And I'd read books about people who had done things like that, people who had done far, far more impressive things. For example, there's a 1993 book called Shadows on the Wasteland by Mike Stroud about his and Explorers Club legend. The guy's kind of full of himself. He bills himself the world's greatest living explorer. He's a bit vain, I think, but I guess he's earned it, and he has earned it. He's a legend in the Explorers Club. And he and Stroud did the first unsupported man-haul across Antarctica. And then they wrote, Stroud, who's a physician, a doctor, wrote a book about it. And I just remember reading this book. It was just fascinating, just the suffering and the intensity of it. There's another book, Paddle to the Amazon by a guy called
Is that one Allen? Benedict Allen?
no, Paddle to the
No,
Mad White Giant is
that's Mad White Giant. Okay.
that's Benedict Allen. That's been okay. Don Starkwell, 1987, Paddle to the Amazon, and Mad White Giant, 1985. But he admits that he embellished it, so it's now classified as a novel. But he did do a trip, but he just kind of made it sound better than it actually was. Yeah. So I found these books fascinating. They're just really enjoyable reading, especially, you know, just working and then shopping and then feeling a bit bored. And then reading a book like that sort of takes people out of themselves to a kind of an adventure and adventurous mindset. So I just sort of put it all together and I thought, well, why don't I walk around the island of Taiwan? It will also be a good way for me to make a claim of sorts on being connected to this island and not just being another expat white English teacher or foreign English teacher who shows up and smiles and everyone's very nice to and then disappears and then another guy shows up, etc. I mean, you can be here for 20 years and people will come up to you and say, "Welcome to Taiwan." Or "How long have you been in Taiwan?" So it's like you're always in some way you're always kind of just arriving here, or you're just a recent arrival in a sense, in the way that some people see you. So I was trying to sort of push past that and get to a state of mind where it's like, no, I've really done something here. I've sort of left a mark, and that sort of entitles me to be, to some extent, part of Taiwan, not just a visitor.
Was it 2006 when you embarked from the northern part of the Danshui River and started your clockwise trip around the island? Is that right?
That's right. Yes, it was November 19th, 2006.
And during this process, the day-to-day process, were you taking a notebook and pen with you? Were you writing down observations? Or was it about just the walking and engaging with the physical surroundings?
No, I didn't take a notebook. I took a camera. I had a little point and shoot digital camera. And then when I got back, I would upload the pictures and write some descriptive text of the day, like a record of the day, to a blogger account. So I have two blogger accounts, originally called Around Taiwan in 80 Days and Around Taiwan in 80 Days Part 2. And so that I would write an account of each day and put the pictures up. And I didn't really promote these as a social media thing. But it was a good way to keep records. And I was able to use those, of course, when I eventually wrote the book.
In the book, one of the things that stood out to me was you were fond of describing geologic features in the landscape. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about how you connected with that aspect of the land and what you thought that would evoke for the reader.
Well, I guess it was a reflection of two things. In the book, it was a reflection of two things. One, just to describe the scenery, so describing the volcanoes or the cliffs or something like that seemed important, because that was a very important part of the experience of walking through these areas. But also, it reflects my own sort of process of getting to know Taiwan. And there I just thought, but I would share the information. I mean, geology is often extremely violent and in slow motion, and sometimes it snaps and you have volcanoes or earthquakes or other phenomena. But in Taiwan, it's just the idea of these two tectonic plates and one riding over the other and pushing up a very mountainous core. Like most of Taiwan is actually mountainous. I think pound for pound, it's probably one of the most mountainous countries in the world. I don't know if it probably can't compete with Nepal, but it's extremely mountainous. many peaks above 3,000 meters, and about 100 peaks above 3,000 meters. And what caused that is interesting. These two tectonic plates slamming together in slow motion. And the interesting thing is in the north that the plate, the Philippine plate, had been riding over the Eurasian plate, pushing the mountains. But then it reversed. They say reverse polarity. It sort of snapped and went under it instead of riding over it. And a large section of the Earth's crust went down, subducted, and went close to the mantle and liquefied, melted basically because of the heat of the mantle, and then came back up as volcanoes. So that's the origin of the volcanoes in Yaminsan. That at this time when the plates, the Eurasian, the Philippine plate, which had been riding over the Eurasian plate in the north, when it snapped and went under the Eurasian plate in the north, the entire Taipei Basin just sank about 500 to 1,000 meters. So I just find it interesting to know the story behind the scenery you see, that mountain or that cliff or that volcano. I just find it interesting myself.
And walking along the coast or traveling along it, as I did by bus or train, the beauty of this landscape is wonderful, but there were times walking along it where you encountered some danger as well, where the mountain line runs all the way up to the sea, or there are rock slides and such. There were some close calls, right?
There was one notable close call, yes, and that I believe you're referring to the Suao to Hualien highway called the Suhua, where the wall of mountain goes directly to the ocean. Most of Taiwan, the mountains are set back from the ocean by, might not be much, might be just a few kilometers, but at the Suhua you have a Mount Qingshui and other mountains directly going to the ocean, and that part from southern Yilan to northern Hualien is a kind of very tough place to build a road. So before the Japanese period, there had been indigenous communities that had built trails over the mountains near the coast, sort of between villages for commerce or, exchanges of various sorts, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. And then the Qing dynasty had made those into sort of a more integrated trail network. And then when the Japanese came in, they did things, proper fashion. And they turned that into the original Suhua Road. But it's not a place that is meant for a road. There's rock falls caused by heating and cooling, by typhoons, and there's earthquakes. So over time, so the KMT government that was originally in charge of the country, and then further governments had opted to build tunnels and said, like, having this old section of road on the side of the mountain just became problematic. It fell away. It just disappeared. It got covered in rocks. It was just too dangerous. So they say, oh, let's build a tunnel. And then some of the tunnels turned out to be too dangerous. So let's build a more stable tunnel. So when I was walking in that section, I was trying to avoid just walking on a sidewalk in a tunnel. That's boring and no fun at all. So I did explore some of the surviving fragments of road that were on the cliff or some of the old tunnels. And most of these have gates and fences and, do not go in. But I didn't care. I just went in, and one section of old road I went on, it was just kind of a weird place, and I had to climb a fence. There was a sign that had bullet holes in it. I don't know. Taiwan's not a place where you're allowed to have a gun. I don't know who was shooting at this sign. And I was walking down this little old road with trees coming up to the road, and I was starting to see more and more rocks on the road itself. And I kept going. I was just feeling a bit nervous, a bit exposed by myself, and then suddenly ahead of me, a huge rock fell from the cliff above and smashed into a tree that was on the left side, on the downslope side, and smashed the top of this tree into thousands of little splinters. And then I heard the rock going down the side of the mountain, sort of doom, 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 down the mountain. And I was so scared. I'd never experienced anything like that. I mean, really scared, like really, really scared, like a physical sensation in my stomach. And it's just, yeah, that was, I decided to turn around and go back that day. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine you were, because even I was scared reading about that passage. Like, geez, that's terrifying. What just happened there? I'd like to ask you to describe your process of how you were dealing with this. You had a full-time job and you would do your Monday to Friday. And when you had days you could devote to walking, you'd travel to wherever you left off and continue along. So sometimes there were a few days in between travels, and other times there were a few months in between travel. So could you talk about that process and what it was
Sure,
like to
sure.
do it in that way?
Well, first, I think your listeners need to take into consideration the fact that this was quite a long time ago. So now we're familiar with YouTube channels, and blogs are a big thing, and podcasts like your own. And they have all this social media infrastructure like Substack and Patreon and all that kind of stuff. At that time, I didn't even no, I wasn't really online very much. There was one community called forumosa.com, which is a BBS service. And I would occasionally post updates on that, but I wasn't trying to gain publicity or set any records. So I basically did it when I felt like it. I was just the one thing I was determined was I was going to finish it. I was going to finish it. Um, and then I'd have, months or weeks when I was really into it. I was really excited about it. And then other things would happen. I would get injured. And I got a little bit sort of downhearted about the trip later on, especially when I was on the West Coast, which is completely different than the East Coast because it's mucky and murky. And there's not a distinct shoreline. There's many different shorelines, so it's hard to just follow the shore. It just doesn't work like that. So I got disheartened. And then eventually kind of rallied and said, okay, I got to finish this thing and then finish it off. But that's why it ended up taking so much time.
That is the important moment, though, because you were feeling down and not motivated to continue, but you dug in and found that and persevered and continued on with it. So there's quite a nice scene when you finally reach the Danshui at the end, and you have a few people there waiting for you to celebrate.
That
It
was a
was a
good
nice
day. That was a
moment.
very good day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we met up in Bali, and then we took the boat over to Danshui and then walked up to Fisherman's Wharf. So they sort of stayed with me for the trip. So we had a little bit of a walk together, and then got to Fisherman's Wharf where I had started 8 years earlier, or 7.5 years earlier. And yeah, that was a very good moment for sure.
Did they just build a bridge across that area?
They're building one. It's almost
They're building
complete.
one.
Well,
Okay.
it's 90% built, but there's still a gap. But there's a huge. I believe it'll be the world's largest asymmetrical cable-stayed bridge called the Danjiang Bridge from from the Danshui side to the Bali side and connecting to Taipei port. Yeah. I think that'll be finished this autumn 2025.
I'd like to ask you a couple more questions about this walk. And one of the goals for doing this beyond the exercise and the physical challenge was to gain a deeper appreciation and build a stronger connection with Taiwan, its people, and its landscape. Could you talk a little about that process, what you learned along the way doing this?
I guess that's interesting. It's a good question. What I learned lots of little things. There was no one, you know, vast insight into Taiwanese culture that I gained at some point. It was more like a collage of thousands or tens of thousands of moments and images of people and landscapes that gave me a kind of experience that is a little bit similar to what we have when we grow up or we live in a place. Like imagine someone who, for example, lives in Toronto or New Orleans for 5 years and they just have a lot of experiences and moments there which sort of combine together to give them an impression of that place. And I gained that of Taiwan for sure. Um, of the Taiwanese people, I would say it's just, there's a certain kind streak. Not saying every Taiwanese person is super kind and people outside of Taiwan aren't kind, but there is a very thick vein of kindness which runs through the culture. And sometimes it's unexpected. So I remember one time I was in Pindong and it was a hot day. It was like in mid-30s and I was trying to get to the shore from a bus stop so I could continue the coastal walking. And it was a bit complicated and I was sweating a lot. I was walking through this little community near the sea and everyone was sort of pointing at me, the foreigner, foreigner, Waiguoren, Adoa. And they're laughing at me. And I was probably overreacting because I was hot and a bit frustrated. So I was just getting a little annoyed. And then this guy comes by on a motorcycle. This dude comes by on a motorcycle, drives up, hands me a bottle of water, drives off. And he looked like quite a stern fellow, but it was just an act of kindness. And many times, when I was walking through Taiwan, people tried to help. They were kind, they were friendly, they were nice. And not once did anyone try to mess with me or disrespect me or mock. There's one guy, he was a Chinese tourist. He was an old man and he was sort of making some kind of weird, he was by a tourist bus. He was making some kind of silly actions that felt mocking, but he was with a Chinese, China tour package. But everyone else in the entire experience was at worst neutral and at best very kind and very nice. So that's I guess a dominant theme of the culture is that, yeah, it's really true. It's not just Taipei or it's not just superficial. It's all over the island and it seems very sincere.
And I want to also ask you about the physical and also mental process of walking as well. Did you learn anything about walking itself?
I've always been a good walker. I've always liked walking. So for me, it just came natural. When I'm walking, I kind of relax and my mind feels kind of free. So I like it. For me, it's a relaxing activity. Now, if I'm walking in a place I've walked hundreds of times before, it doesn't work so well. But when I'm walking on a hiking trail or a nice path, it just gives me enough of a sense of I'm doing something to kind of calm my mind down, but obviously it's not very demanding. So I guess I feel very free to think about whatever I want. So my imagination is free, my memory, planning, get ideas, or just imagining things. Sometimes I'm bicycling and I think, oh, I better pay more attention to my surroundings. I'm getting too involved in my thought process. It might be a little bit dangerous. Or motorcycling or driving, that's could be very dangerous, right? But for walking, it's much less dangerous, especially except for maybe traffic. So I like it. It's relaxing and very stimulating to my thought process. And I would say there's another benefit too, which is that you're more interactable with. If you're bicycling, let's say there's a party going on the lawn of a house, and you're on a bicycle, and you sort of bicycle by it, you'll sort of be in a connected, interactable space with those people for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Somebody might wave, somebody might point at you or smile or look at you, but then you're gone. The bike goes on quite quickly. But if you're walking by, you're right there. and it just seems natural maybe to stop and take a look. It doesn't seem too nosy or anything like that. So when you're walking, you're sort of in other people's space to some extent, so you can kind of feel like you're participating a little bit more in what's going on around you.
In this entire process, did you realize or decide that I have a book here and I would like to write this book about this whole journey?
That when I was on discussing the trip on the old BBS, it's still around. But of course, a lot of these old BBSs have kind of become, this one's called forumosa.com, have become a little bit less relevant in the age of Facebook and Instagram and stuff. There's still a small community, but back in the day, it was very, very important expat communication resource in Taiwan. And there was another guy on it who was, I think you know him, John Grant Ross, who is the author and editor and publisher in Taiwan. And he said, well, John, when you're walking by Chiayi, come and visit me and my wife. Well, we can put you up and we can have a chat. So years later, I remembered that. I said, okay, I contacted and said, okay, John, I'm going to be in your area soon. So we agreed to meet. And then we were there, and John likes to have a few beers. So we're having a few beers together. And he said, I have a suggestion for you. You should write a book. So he was the guy that actually put the idea into my head. So I have to give him credit for that. I was sort of an influential suggestion on his part. And I thought it over and then said, yeah, let's do it.
You kept a blog and wrote about your trips in the first person. Did that experience translate well to sitting down and writing this in a book form?
It was very helpful. Of course, I had all the material, sort of detailed notes, including locations and descriptions of places that I could do further research on because I had enough information to have search parameters and feelings, et cetera, et cetera. But the travel log, like reading a 1-day travel log is okay, but would you want to read 83 days of a daily travel log? It would get a little bit repetitive. So it was the beginning of the story, but then I had to add another narrative to the story to make it readable to your average person. So then I thought I would combine another narrative track, which is the narrative of Taiwan, and I try to somehow map it or match it to some extent with my trip clockwise from northern Taiwan to eastern, southern, western, and then back to northern Taiwan. So I tried to match it with the layers. So the beginning is the geological layer, which you mentioned earlier, the formation of Taiwan. Then the life coming to Taiwan after that, the plants and animals. And then on the East Coast, it's a great place to talk about the indigenous people of Taiwan, because the East Coast is one of the great strongholds of indigenous people. Then I was in the South talking about the Dutch and the Ming loyalist Zhensen Gong, better known as Koxinga. And then, of course, the Qing takeover. And then when I got to Taijiang, it was a good time to talk about the Japanese era, because basically Taijiang was basically created by the Japanese as an industrial city. And then back to Taipei to talk about, to wrap up and talk about modern Taiwan, because Taipei is obviously a good example of modern Taiwan. So along with the narrative of the actual travel, I had to sort of craft this other narrative that matches. So that's the basis for the book, really.
So I want to come back to this book for the final two questions I'm going to ask you, but let's go to something else that you've been working on recently and introduce that to listeners. And it's called The Resilience Roadmap, an emergency preparedness guide for expats in Taiwan.
Yes.
And I saw that the second edition of this resilience roadmap came out. Could you introduce what is a resilience roadmap?
Resilient, it's just a catchy title, but it's a guide, it's a guidebook to help people become more resilient in the face of disasters, which can strike at any time, natural and man-made. So obviously fire can be a danger anywhere. Many places have the threat of earthquakes, and Taiwan is definitely pretty high on that list for major earthquakes, um, and typhoons as well. So So then those are three natural disasters which Taiwan is pretty well equipped to deal with. And Taiwanese people get a lot of training and education to deal with as they grow up, as they move through society, move through life. Sometimes expats, especially those who haven't been here for so long, there may be a little bit of a gap there in terms of their knowledge and preparedness for these things. They may not be used to. I'm sure people from Florida would be quite familiar with, hurricanes and typhoons, but some people might not be familiar. So I thought could be a useful guide for expats there. But the real clincher for all this was the threat of war. So the book is a guide. It's a 70-page community resource PDF, free book, and it covers preparing for and dealing with fires, typhoons, earthquakes, and the threat of war, basically a military action by China. And it's focused on expats because we have a unique circumstance. We mostly don't have the same social resources, social capital of being able to just go to your uncle's place in the countryside or something like that. And so I thought that it was more important for expats to make preparations in advance, but also important for Taiwanese. But I just thought as an expat, I know the expat reality fairly well, and I can sort of speak with a authentic voice that could hopefully resonate with other members of the community. And hopefully it'll never be necessary for them to use any of this information. Hopefully, but I think, hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Hmm. How did the opportunity to write this come to you?
Well, if you want to write something and give it away for free, everyone's got that opportunity. There's no problem with that. If you sort of let go of money and success, and you just say, I want to write something good and put it out there, and I'll publish it myself. Which fortunately is very easy to do these days. With if you have a blog and put it on Facebook, you can get distributed. I mean, there was a total of about 2 versions, one December 2023, second one March 2025. Between the 2 versions, I probably had about 7,000 copies distributed. So if I charged money for that, maybe it would have been far less. So it's a bit of a catch-22. But other than just, making fun of that word opportunity, how did I get involved in doing this project? I guess it's because I was part of an informal group of people who had started to think about these issues, especially in the face of first Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, and then second, in the same year, in August of the same year, the first of the full-scale PLA, People's Liberation Army, exercises around Taiwan, um, Navy, Air Force, Rocket Force, everything, and just this kind of scary blockade or invasion rehearsal. And I think people thought with Ukraine and with this, it could definitely happen here. I'm not saying it will or that I know when it will happen or anything like that, but people who say, nah, it's not going to happen, I don't think they know. I don't think anybody knows, but I think the chance of it happening has become more real. So yes, if people go to the Culture Shack blog, and it's not the most recent article, I believe it's the second most recent article, they'll find one that says update resilience roadmap version 2.0, and there's a free download, and there's no I don't think there's any hitchhikers with the download, no cookies or trackers or anything like that, just a clean download from my wordpress.com blog.
Great. So I want to ask before my final two questions. I have a little idea of the project you're working on now, and it sounds really interesting. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing just a detail about the project you're working on now.
Okay, so the project I'm working on now is to walk or bicycle through every street and neighborhood in the Taipei Basin, and I've completed about 60% of that. So it's just like kind of similar to walking around the island. So the theme is similar, it's sort of a variation of that theme, but applied to the Taipei Basin. And it's just walking through every street, every park. I mean, every street. I suppose there's some streets or little alleys that are 100 meters long that I've just sort of looked down. Um, but the intention is to go basically everywhere, not literally in front of every doorway, but to have seen every neighborhood and every local, part of a neighborhood in the Taipei Basin, and by walking and also by the share bikes here they call U bikes.
I'm really looking forward to what that what's done. It, and you just said something there. I don't think anyone's done it before. I have a question about your trip around Taiwan on foot. Has anyone in history ever done this before? It's possible that in the millions of people who have lived and visited Taiwan, you're the only human being in history who has walked the entire coast. Has that ever occurred to you?
It's possible. I mean, there were some sections of the coast I did miss, but I'm going back I missed for various reasons. It was dark and it was too dangerous, things like that. I'm going back to cover all those areas systematically. Um, I may have been the first to do it. Um, I may not have been. There could have been just some maverick individual who just wanted to do it for fun and did it and didn't bother to do a record of it. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. However, I think there's people who have done it subsequent to that. I don't know if it's because of I'd like to think so, but I also don't want to get too big for my boots, so to speak. It may just be that these ideas might come up in culture at the same time to different people, right? But there's been a number of people who've done it since then. So I'm not the only person. It's possible I'm the first. It's possible I'm the first. Yes.
How have the Taiwanese people reacted to the publication of this book and the story that you've done this? Quite amazing feat.
Um. Well, it's been pretty positive. I was invited on a Taiwan Plus TV show, and in I'd say mild to moderate interest. My students or people that knew me personally were, they wanted to say, John, I have to get a copy of your book. And many of them, uh, some of them could have had the English ability, but as you know, conversational ability or menu and street sign reading ability in a foreign language is very different than reading hundreds of pages that are written in a, different register. So I'm guessing that many of them probably didn't actually read the book or didn't read most of it, but did so just to be nice, just to be my friend or something like that. But I would say that most of the overt response I got was actually from my fellow expats. So people at parties like, "Hey, you're the guy that did that book. I wanted to meet you." That happened a few times. It's just strange. I'm not used to being in any way a celebrity or a famous person. So when it happened, it just kind of like a little bit taken aback. Now I just try to be, really nice to the person and appreciative, and it feels good, I guess.
I want to ask you about the cover of this book, the picture on the cover. You walked clockwise.
Just
Yeah, you walked
this one.
clockwise around Taiwan, but in this photo, the water is to the right of you. So was it just a photo opportunity that you took, or could you explain
Yeah, that was just
the
it was
choosing
just a
of this
cover
photo?
shot. It was a cover shot, and we took it that way because of where the light was, and that was on Baisawan Beach sometime in I think 2019 when we were putting the book package together and taken by my friend Dazzler, who owns a fish and chip shop on Baisawan Beach, and he agreed to take the photo for me, and Not too. That's pretty good, Tyrel. Not too many people notice that. Only a few people, but they're quite happy that they caught that. Some people they say, "Ah, I caught that." You know.
The last question I want to ask you, it's one that I like asking all authors, is tell me about how you came up with the title and how it evokes a sense of what you're saying in this book.
Okay. So as I said to an earlier question, the concept of the walk, the idea of making a claim to belonging here, not just to be a visitor, but to belonging to this place. How do you actually become, in a way, Taiwanese? So Taiwanese society it's changing, I guess, but it's not really an immigrant society in the way Canada is. So somebody who is Sikh or a Nigerian or a Pacific Islander can move to Canada, get a passport, and then they're Canadian. That's it. No problem. And most people think that's fine. But in Taiwan, to become Taiwanese, I don't really know what that means. I mean, would I even want to be Taiwanese? It's just the culture is so different. I mean, I wouldn't mind, I guess, but it just doesn't really compute to become a Taiwanese person. Um, but I thought because I walked around the island that I could claim to be Taiwanese from the ankles down, so that I'm not a Taiwanese guy, but I have Taiwanese feet. So that was the concept for the title.
Right. Well, I really enjoyed the book, and I think it's an amazing feat that you accomplished, both in writing it and actual walking. So thanks very much for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been fun.
Thank you very much, Tyrel, for giving me some time on your program. I've really enjoyed reminiscing and enjoyed talking with you too, sir.